Okay, I'll try. A very good afternoon and a big thank you to all our guests. Some of you have traveled long distances to join us this afternoon. Program mentors, students, friends and family of students, members of the IMA community, for joining us to celebrate a topic, or more appropriately, a value that is intrinsic to most of us present here. It is not the first time we're echoing Indianness at IIM Ahmedabad. We have been for the past 5 years with the creative and cultural program students reflecting and reiterating, and more recently in a significant conversation with Sri Rajiv Sethi. As some of you know, he's a Padma Shri awardee and a celebrated stenographer. It does appear to be a quest, but unquestionably it is omnipresent in our day-to-day lives. Then why is it such a challenge for us and the rest of the world to effortlessly articulate Indianness? Going back to the conversation with Mr. Sethi, his resolve for this search for Indianness was epitomized in the mythological story of the musk deer. The deer hunts for the musk smell everywhere, never to find it, because it was not anywhere to find but within himself. So we can only begin to be recognized for that special scent if we first find it within ourselves, and second, share it generously with the country and the rest of the world. On that note, may I please invite Anshul Jain, co-chair of the program, to give a brief introduction to CCBP and begin the much awaited deliberation.
Thank you, Gitanjali. Before we get to the deliberation, I'll take a few minutes to introduce to our guests who may not be introduced to the program that this is the 6th edition that we've just concluded. And this program, I'll give you a quick highlight. I mean, in the morning already, Amit described how it is structured, so I'm not getting into that. But I'd just like to highlight a few keywords that we really stand for. And this is one of the values that Gitanjali mentioned. We are going to be discussing this and its manifestations, really the Indianness, what makes each one of us unique and threaded by that common scent that we would find in ourselves called Indianness. And how do we bring this to the world? Because that's the reason why we will exist and compete successfully with anyone in the world. The second key value that we stand for is consciousness. Mindfulness, thoughtfulness in every which way. Starting with yourself, the environment, the business practices, and the human values. And the human values become even more important in our case because we are working in an ecosystem that is largely artisanal, that Indianness is not residing in the urban areas. That Indianness is to be found everywhere. And our task is to be not just be sympathetic to them, but actually bring them, invite them into the kitchen, share the value with them. I'm convinced, and the program is convinced, and I'm sure all the 150, 160 people who have gone through this program are convinced that the only way to increase the value that we generate for our services, our products, our concepts is by inviting the whole value chain to participate. And then the value which is additionally generated must be distributed equitably. So this is one of the fundamental foundations of the program. So it's not just about creating businesses, It's not just creating profitable businesses, scalable, sustainable businesses, but it's also how you do it. And it's never at loggerheads with the objectives of profitability and sustainability are actually not fighting with each other, and that's the basic conviction of the program. Another very important aspect, and that actually epitomizes the program delivery, is the golden thread alignment. You know, when the value proposition that uh, whatever we are doing as a service product is really clear, not only to you, but you're able to transmit it very transparently through every touch point of your value chain and of the customer experience. We will see this later, and it relates to, in a way, to Indianness. I remember the conversation with Mr. Gildo Zania when he was here last year, where he was talking about the importance of the brand Zania and the fundamental principle that it rested on was Italianness. That people were first actually buying into the notion of that aesthetic. And that aesthetic stemmed from a strong rootedness in the national aesthetic. As I said, the human value chain. We will talk about it in the deliberation. Far more importantly, I touched upon it earlier, but I just wanted to emphasize the value, the huge treasure that the country sits on. But that needs to be nurtured, empowered, and treated as an integral part of the value chain, and not just a supply chain. Just a quick recap, you saw the 6. Today you will see 30 and more showcases, but just a quick recap of some of the very few selected. It was hard to put everyone here, but some of the alumni work. Chocolates, you must have heard of Mason & Co. She was the first batch. When she came in, she was making 18 bars in a bedroom every day. From then on to be selling in more than 160 points of sales, and a cult chocolate in the vegan market. Zola, that works with a very interesting business model of creating workshops with different art, craft clusters, creating jewelry with the tribal women, and then creating those collections and bringing back those that business into those clusters as a sustainable way of creating livelihood. Upasana, Uma, while she's been championing the idea of consciousness in fashion for a long time now, and perhaps doesn't need more introduction than that. Mark's Coffee. I can safely say it's probably the best coffee in the country. We have Sonali here. Her work and the struggles that she's gone through and the journey she's since undertaken with her beautiful work with gold and diamonds is absolutely incredible. Bhavya, in fact, tomorrow, Bandana, you are on the jury for the first circular award, which is the most sustainable circular design awards instituted at the Lakme Fashion Week. They had a national competition, and Bhavya is one of the 6 finalists. Sharad is here as well. For someone to have the courage and own up the tradition, the culture so strongly and say, I'll build a business with just one product, a nose pin. So from thinking about the nose pin as the last thing of a piece of jewelry that a woman thinks of to making it really central to the business. Many, many other success stories, beautiful stories. I wish I could run through all of them, but um, hopefully you will all have opportunities to connect with them and more as the time goes by. Sujata doing incredible work with Kantha, and Nidhi, who's been actually working with um, TV and film costumes, transitioned into Pretaporte and has created a language which is very distinct, very beautiful, and yet rooted in her skill set, which is she's a dreamer, she's theatrical, but how to bring that into Pretaporte is very, very interesting. Um, as Gitanjali said, and I mentioned, we started a series of deliberations a couple of years ago, very tentative first few steps in exploring what Indianness is, could be, what could it mean, how it could be expressed, and how it is important. So while Gildo emphasized, in fact, re-emphasized what we've always suspected and believed in, and this was a huge conviction, uh, delivery of conviction for us to believe that, yes, indeed, we are thinking right. And of course, uh, Rajiv Sethi's beautiful words and lecture that he delivered here, talking about the mustier story. So that brings us to where we are today. And for us, the most interesting part about Indianness, well, we can keep exploring and wondering what Indianness is, but the question now is, how do we not just celebrate Indianness, but actually challenge its current manifestation? And try to think and project on where we can travel to, where we can go with this and create our own place, our own space in the world. Um, the objective of this series of conversations, and we are very fortunate to have an incredible panel today, is to really start imagining how Indianness can be strongly manifested with this common thread, which is running across different unique expressions through different creative forms, different cultural forms. But all of them are unique, they're contemporary, and more importantly, they're relevant to the lives of a global customer. When I say global customer, it's not just outside of India, but all of us as well. We live a different life. And whatever forms and expressions we think of must be relevant to us in our daily lives. So this is what we hope to explore. Now, the most exciting thing we've seen that India and the view on how people look at India has changed dramatically. We have seen, or rather the world has seen, and we have shown what we can do with our minds. We have Microsoft, we have Google, we have Pepsi, we have the top corporates now being run by Indian minds. We have one of our own batchmates, Raghuram Rajan, who showed at a world scale what India can do with our minds. Now, it is very interesting, very symbolic that we should be discussing this subject of today at IIM Ahmedabad, because this institution has contributed significantly to what the world perceives as what Indians can do, what we can do with our minds. It's now time to show to the world what we can do when a mind, when a hands, and a heart come together. And I'm extremely delighted that this conversation is also happening and being seeded at IIM Ahmedabad. So with this, I am looking forward to this conversation, and I would like to welcome the panelists. Let me invite one at a time. Mr. Aman Nath, you see, is not present amongst us today physically. He unfortunately pulled his back very seriously yesterday morning. But he was really upset that he cannot come. He has recorded 4 different videos that we have with us. He's also on the standby on the Skype. So we'll run through the presentations. We'll plug in his videos as per the right moment. At the end, we will bring him on the Skype as well so that he can listen to us, interact with you, take questions, and be part of the conversation. Mr. Manath, of course, the founder, historian, the founder of Nimirana hotels, or non-hotels, I should say. Doesn't need any more introduction. May I invite, we can start with Hari. Hari Nair, the founder of Holiday IQ, and more importantly, as he says, he's a traveler. And he brings perspectives, not of travel, but travelers. And that is very, very interesting. May I invite Bandana Tewari. Very recognizable name and face. In the world of fashion, a very strong voice. We are very fortunate to have her fly in from Bali for this conversation and spend 2 days with us. Richard Mascarenhas. Richard will be bringing a very important angle to the conversation, which is music. As a head of video content business at Sony Music, music, of course, is the foundation of how the soft power, the creative power, and this brand India can spread in the world. So we'll be very curious to see how music industry and generally entertainment is helping us in this direction. And lastly, not least, of course, Shefalee. Shefalee Vasudev, with her very insightful, very investigative, very thoughtful voice on fashion, on design. I'll be very foolish to call her a journalist because I think she's a very good thinker as well. And so we'll have 5 panelists today, different perspectives, but as a wholesome, hopefully we'll have a lot to bring to the table. As we say, I remember back when I was a student here, we were always told will not be given answers. So when the panelists were asking me what should be the objectives, the outcomes of this deliberation, my answer to them was, no, we don't prescribe, but I'll be happy if at the end of it, all the people present here are sufficiently provoked into original and personal thought, because that's what we are about. I mean, when we are looking at Indianness, it's about you. So hopefully this conversation will get you to think. May I, with permission of everyone, begin the deliberation? We can start by just questioning or wondering how travel, and more importantly, so we'll start by playing Mr. Nath's video. Can we have the video, please? So one of the questions we ask ourselves is, how is this Indian voice, which is so deeply rooted in tradition for all of us, find a contemporary voice, a contemporary expression, a more relevant expression? Let's see what Mr. Nath has to say on that. Eight. Yeah. Thank you.
So if we are to talk about how do we make
Wonderful.
this uniqueness relevant to the contemporary world, I think one country which has done it fairly right is Japan. It has kept its tradition, it's modern. So if we are to talk about how do we make this uniqueness relevant to the contemporary world, I think one country which has done it fairly right is Japan. It has kept its tradition, it's modern, and it's not in any way embarrassed to be traditional when it is being traditional. So I think India could learn from that. In the heritage hotels, for example, if we are 80% Indian, I say this just off the cuff, and 20% Western or modern in the sense of efficient, hygienic, all the things that that make us more relevant today, then the mix could be right. Everybody has to find their own balance in this mix. But whatever your strengths are, it's important that you highlight those. I read recently that in Hong Kong, where they have a lot of street artists, who do your caricatures, somebody came up with this brilliant idea to personalize a stay. So when you were staying for 4 or 5 days in a hotel, every time you came back to your hotel, on your mirror, they had made a caricature of you. From the website, they take your photographs, they tell a street artist to paint, your face on the side on board. And you can't but notice it and also be impressed with the idea that somebody's painted your face today like this and tomorrow in another way and a third way, and you photograph it, you share it with the world, you spread the word about the personal attention that a hotel can give you. If you look at fashion, India has become tailored to the world, but we do things to other people's designs, but we influence their designs. India comes in fashion, India goes out of fashion, Indian naturals come, embroideries come, applique comes. So we've made a mark in that world. But I think in the world of hospitality, competing, we've got wonderful hotels, we've got wonderful hoteliers, but I think that their accent has been always to match up to the big players in the world, but not. It's beginning to happen. I mean, one shouldn't say it isn't happening, but I think that on the edge of it, there's always that little thing of trying to be Western rather than Indian. I went to Aurangabad, and they had very strange names. Everything had to be intercontinental. Everything had to have international, as if that was the measure. That you success comes back to you only from the West. What about looking within? What about looking at the five senses? What about looking at the navrasas and accentuating the Indian thing, but not on your face, but doing it in that extraordinary subtlety for which India is also known by suggestion. so that people, get India in its aromas, get India in its touch, get India in simplicity, in khadi, in linen, or whatever we are good at doing. So the third point, sorry, how can we best harness it, make it a compelling and loud voice in the world? I think that in a country like India, where the medieval and modern coexist, we have a huge spectrum of choice, and we should be proud of that. We're unlike the fully developed world, which cannot, in that time warp, take advantage of its past. Because they are dead societies and they're evolving in a different way. But they're not living traditions like India is. India is the only continuously alive civilization in the world. Perhaps you could put Japan also into it. But the scale of India and how it's gone on and on and on. So when we say, कुछ बात है कि हस्ती मिटती नहीं हमारी, that I think is the essence. So what is that continuity that we seek? So by suddenly trying to imitate, emulate, copy, we become mongrel, we become hybrid. But for India, it's important that we become integrated Indians. I'm speaking in English, I'm dressed in European attire, but not because I have a complex, but because I go to work in a certain way, in a certain kind of office. That is also changing. If people wear kurta pajama to an office, it's not considered alarming. But that facility is allowed more to the women, I think. They get in and out of costume. I mean, a lady banker can wear a black sari to a cocktail. She can wear black trousers to a cocktail. But if you want to be in that corporate world, then you're not, unless you're a politician, I think, you don't have to necessarily brand yourself Indian and dress like that. People are comfortable to wear a black trouser and a black coat. So I think we need to center that time warp. We have to come backward, forward, and evolve at this moment something that is appealing. In the 70s, that was a different appeal. In the 80s, it was a different appeal. And in the 21st century, when India is eternally in fashion for certain things, we can take the liberty of extending that. For example, when we were children, nobody ate Japanese food. Nobody had heard of a Japanese restaurant, nobody knew what sushi was. Today, it's all over the world. I was recently at a conference with a minister in Uttarakhand, and we were talking of cuisine. They had served the cuisine of the area, which is outstanding, delicious, relevant because it was very cold. It was, they had madwe ka atta, which is like a black millet, and it makes a roti, which is very, very interesting. It's like makki ki roti is golden, that is kind of brownish black. And I raised an issue that when you go to the hotels in Bombay and to the 5 stars and so on, many chefs are from Uttarakhand. Why is it that nothing on their menus is from Uttarakhand? Is it because they are less? Is it because they don't know how to grow, they don't know how to eat? It's because they don't know how to package it right. I think that as a nation, to acknowledge our diversity and our strengths, it would be fantastic. We have Chinese restaurants, we have pizza restaurants, we eat American hamburgers. But why would somebody not package the food of Uttarakhand, which is much closer to us than any of these countries are, and serve you yogurt, which is outstanding. They serve a yogurt on their weddings, which is yellow, tangy. There's another yogurt that they do with I'm not really a chef, but I eat it and I know that it's delicious, and I say, why don't we get this in Delhi? So if somebody was to make a cookbook of food from Uttarakhand, then it would slowly step in. Even wine, for example, 20 years ago, no wine was served when you went out in India. And then the French made a concerted effort to give people the acquired taste, and then all the countries got into it, and now importing wine, serving wine has become a huge business. So I think individuality, understanding when you travel in India, the differences of India, so that you go from the west to the east, everything should be different. The way you sleep, the way you wake, the way you eat, and that is the best way to harness the individuality and the individual strengths of every part of India rather than try to homogenize everybody, make them insipid and without identity.
Shefalee, Mr. Nath points out something very, very interesting, which is about fusion versus integration. He is suggesting that the idea of making Indianness contemporary has been by making a fusion, 50-50, 60-40. And that is not the way. He's suggesting integrate it, embrace it totally, and the manifestation needs to be different. How do you, or anyone after you, let's. Take another one.
Good afternoon, everyone. Until contemporariness and modernity, I see as different positions. Contemporariness can be evolved without fusion. It does not need the Japanese sushi counter for me to wear my tanchoi sari and go and have it there. But modernity is really inflection, reflection, and mixing and blending of thoughts, of ideas, of products, of skills. And their collaborations, both of nations, of communities, perhaps of countries, of artisanal traditions, would bring or urge a more modern approach. That's how I see it.
A completely, layman's view of it. Don't understand the fashion side of it at all. But if I were to look at this idea of Indianness from another completely different perspective, let me take food. And this notion of how do you bring contemporariness into the idea of our food. And I see, for example, globally, Indian chefs have gone and done, famous restaurants of Indian food. And to me, that's a good example of fusion, not integration. I'll tell you why I believe that to be so, is that I think essentially what you're trying to do is take the Western idea of food, structure of food, which is basically one protein in the center and bread on the side. And it's my belief that that's not the structure of Indian food. Structure of Indian food is actually grain in the center and a whole bunch of array of things that come and go in music, in your thali. And if you think about that at its fundamental, maybe we would do contemporary Indian food in very different ways. So sometimes I have a feeling that we might not be looking at the essence of what is that Indianness. We probably are occasionally skimming the surface, at least a very layman's view of that.
Yeah, Hari, that's a very, very interesting point. The point he's making, basically, if I was to rephrase it, is to suggest that, listen, and that's actually the crux. When I say that Indianness must understand how it is relevant to a global customer. Now, take an example of food that he's talking about. I won't even calling it fusion. I call it understanding the customer. It is quite intimidating to put that thali in front of someone that someone doesn't know what to even do with it. He or she can deal with it once in a while, when visiting India perhaps, or visiting an Indian restaurant with in Paris sometimes. But on a daily basis, we've got to adapt it to that protein and the sides. But that is, you're right, that's a structure, but that is a basic understanding on how that customer in their daily lives is using a certain service and a product and the role that it plays, and you can't change a behavior, or that change in behavior is too much to be expected, but we could do very well to understand how we fit in with our own unique proposition. That's the point you're making, and I totally agree. Uh, Anything to that's
So my observation of this, working within fashion, and you know, it's a very visual medium, so visual representation is paramount and very important in my business. And there was a time I had this huge aversion for anyone who said fusion fashion. I mean, I thought it was like my dodgy uncle in the 70s telling me, oh, you know, I'm into import export. I mean, it could mean anything. So I thought fusion fashion was just a reductionist way of describing a non-style. Till, of course, in the last few years, I have begun to reevaluate what fusion fashion perhaps means to a country like ours, where every region actually has different style and fashion nuances. And collectively as a nation, what is happening is that we have costumized our fashion. Whichever way you look, the bridalization, the Bollywoodization, and the costumization has changed the whole visual narrative of what Indian aesthetic means. And for me, that is quite problematic, because when I travel all over the world, as I'm sure everyone does, and you know, the whole idea of Indianness suddenly is very lopsided. They think of Bollywood. With Bollywood comes the absolute tamasha and sometimes the crassness, and you forget we're a 5,000-year legacy, the heritage, where you know we have in any given cupboard you'll have a 150-year-old sari sitting there that's been passed down. We are the ones who put saffron in our food, the most expensive. In a simple rice we sprinkle it. I mean, what traditions don't we have? Such nuances, such subtlety that came from architecture, that came from art. And the only thing that I hear everywhere is Bollywood. And I don't have a problem with Bollywood as a means of entertainment, but when it sabotages the idea of Indianness, I certainly do.
If I may add to that, I have a huge problem with Bollywood as well, especially on the fashion scene. In a recent article arguing about this excess and the weddings that you saw, it was surprising that a lot of mainstream publications and conferences talk about these very Bollywood stars as change makers, as leaders, and felicitate them as agents of change, when all they are actually doing is not changing. They want to look like royalty. Royalty, let's accept, is passe. You know, it's something we are clinging to because we refuse to let go of the narratives which are past. There is a nostalgia, problematic nostalgia with clinging to looking like a king or queen, and so on and so forth, or having 15 parties. And how is this change? How did none of the weddings or the fashions that we saw inside reflected an iota of where a turn can be observed? So yes, I think we might be digressing, but
Sorry. Sorry. Just to add to her point, like this, what this Bollywoodization does, especially when it comes to women, is that the whole idea of Indian beauty has become this Lajavati bride, right? And so it inculcates the idea of patriarchy without us knowing it. So we have got generations of women who are going to grow up thinking that is a female ideal, who is always beautiful and cowering. You know, the whole posture, and this is the power of the visual narrative. And so, you know, I took my job very seriously when I was with Vogue too, and it irked me to no end to have to always cling on to this old repressed narrative for whatever monetary benefit it was accorded.
Thanks, guys. So, the perspective that I'm bringing over here, first of all, good afternoon, everybody. Indianness is in all the things that we do. It's not really that we are acquiring a Western thing. We've seen Westerners always, and we've been very influenced by the West, right? Now, what, like I think Bandana and Shefalee both pointed out in Bollywood, Bollywood highlights this larger than life, glamorous India, right? But what are we really? We really are a very different mindset. We're not connecting with everything that, that Bollywood is bringing on the table. However, there is a whole different twist that's happening with the new filmmakers where they're kind of actually looking at the real, authentic, you know, all of us, the youth out there, and they're trying to spin it now and try to give a perspective which is about a real India. I think that's a good part about the new breed of directors and the new breed of Bollywood filmmakers that we're bringing, which is bringing in fashion, bringing in storylines, bringing in food, culture, various things like that, which is more Indian in their origin and in their specific, right?
Yeah, I think what everyone is saying and the general narrative could also be actually expressed in something that we've been discussing in the classrooms with the program over the years, that, listen, we should not be afraid of global influences working on us, as we call Western influences. These are natural forces. These are natural evolution. We are becoming a more globalized, in other words, world. The world is becoming smaller. We are becoming more and more a world citizen while retaining our strong identity that we are proud of, and that's what makes us, give us a place in this world. At the same time, we should not be shy of influencing the world. And that is where we are kind of missing the trick. And we hope that at the end of this conversation as well, there would be some clues, some provocations to support that. May I invite Hari to talk to us about the traveler's perspective and the tourism industry's role in making Indianness a more, a louder voice. Yes, perhaps. Yeah, just step out, feel free. Just take a label or take. Hemant. Let me start. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Yeah, you want to? Let me show you a quick, half a minute, 45-second video, and then we sort of, then I'll take 5 minutes after that. Can you? Okay, so let me quickly introduce myself. I'm here today largely because I come from a world of travel, and over yesterday and today I've noticed that this program has a lot of representation from fashion, a reasonable amount of representation from yachts, and a small smattering of representation, though extremely interesting representation from travel. So I think travel looks like going to be the next big thing in this area of creative and cultural businesses. So I'm very interested in and intrigued to sort of see the beginnings of that. I started, I had a management consulting background. I spent 15 years doing that. And I'm a traveler by interest and passion, and decided to leave my consulting world and do something in the Indian tourism space more than a decade ago, when tourism was something completely different and is something quite different today. So I'm going to take a minute or less than that, show you a quick film, and then take, as I said, 5 minutes. Audio, yeah. Can you just keep you want to keep a mic there? Does it work?
I'm completely smitten by Vietnam.
For me, Rajasthan is a very good place. And for that same reason, Kerala for me is a very good place.
I like the underbelly of Russia. Russia has this huge side to it which is very different from India, but not optimist.
What is special about Vienna?
I think Vienna has the greatest concentration of historical buildings in the smallest area possible.
So you have guessed by now that I'm interested in travel. So I was mentioning, I left my management consulting background, and one of the things I do now is this. I talk to interesting, successful Indians about the journey of their life, and I ask them how places and travel played into their life. And the reason I do this is because of the business I started. I run a company called Holiday IQ. Holiday IQ is India's first travel community. And what effectively we do there is to try to bring Indian travelers to talk about their travel and, what did they like, what did they not like, what inspired them, and help other Indians plan using that. And one of the things I learned out of doing that business is that we still have a relatively, the broad segment of the Indian traveling group has a relatively narrow view of what is travel. And I thought there'd be a great opportunity to hear about a slightly broader idea of travel by talking to some of the more interesting people across India. This now reaches about 3 to 4 million viewers per episode, and I've just done the 18th one, which I shot with Ratna Pathak Shah last week in Mumbai. So it's a fascinating, for me, what's fascinating about this is the fact that every one of these people is actually very interested in talking about their life and the perspective of their life through travel. So I found that really very interesting, and I think that, to me, in some ways is the kind of takeoff point for finding Indianness in travel. So that's just to give you a very quick sense of it. I'm going to take 2 minutes to tell you some big trends that I'm picking up in travel in India, and the reason I'm going to say that is because I think great opportunity for people here in this room to sort of leverage those trends for what you guys are planning to do or want to do. One of them is that Indian tourism has changed from being, a few foreigners coming to India doing the Delhi, Jaipur, Agra bit to Indians traveling, right? So the numbers are staggering. More than 1 billion trips by domestic trips by Indians last year. 1 billion domestic trips by Indians last year. If you just focus on just this one statistic, you probably have massive opportunities for all your businesses that you're doing. But if you don't stop there, in 2020, 50 million Indians are going to travel abroad. That's the other, big number. The people are going in large numbers, whether they're traveling within India, internationally, they're going in large numbers. How can you sort of leverage some of that in your own areas of work? The other very interesting big trend that we're picking up is, who are these travelers? 50% of all people who plan their trips on Holiday IQ are couples. The older notion of the family driving travel, 15% is solo. And the fastest growing segment of travelers is actually the solo traveler, both men and women going off alone within India is another big trend that we are picking up. And the last, and probably to me one of the most interesting trends, is that the share of wallet of travel is dramatically changing. Earlier, all of the money that you spent on the act of travel, right? Going somewhere. Do you know where a large portion of the money is going, especially for people who travel abroad? It's shopping before you travel. It's an amazing thing. I know folks, and people give a lot of content on Holiday IQ. They're taking a weekend getaway to Lonavala, but they're buying tents and camping gear in Decathlon. I don't know where it sits after it's bought, but people are buying. And of course, clothes and a lot of stuff. So people are actually using travel as a takeoff point for thinking about themselves, what they want to be. They also believe that going abroad gives them a lot more latitude to be more what they are, and so on and so forth. So there are very interesting big trends coming out of travel, which I think are very, very relevant for all of you guys as you're looking at this kind of business. The other very interesting thing, all of the travelers, or a very high percentage of travelers now, come from Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities. So, two big changes in that. One is that the aesthetic, to some extent, is slightly different. More importantly, the kind of destinations they go to are very different. Theirs are destinations closer to their homes, not destinations closer to the metros. And that changes, just in terms of where you can see them, where you can find them, it changes dramatically. So there are places that I hadn't heard of 5 years ago. There's a place in Andhra called Araku Valley. How many of you have heard of it? Yeah, so there are 4. And it's got, the Mahindras now do a beautiful coffee thing there. Araku Valley coffee is going to become the next big thing in India. And so why is Araku Valley big? Because Hyderabad and Vizag became big cities. And so Araku Valley is the closest hill station for, it's not at all a hill station, but it is the closest sort of place with an incline for people to go to. And so that's the thing. So, so these are some of the big trends that we're picking up. I just want to leave you with 3 ideas or 3 directions of thought. And I sort of came up with all of this largely because of yesterday's, the conversation with all of you. So I want to pick up these 3 things. One is, as Anchal mentioned, my interest is travelers. So the first point is, if 1 billion Indians are traveling within India, and if 50 million are traveling outside India, how can you get these numbers to work for you? So, yesterday there was a big discussion about the real Zari, right? Zari work and the real Zari. And one of the discussions was, how do you get consumers to understand the power of that? And I was thinking about that later, saying if everybody who travels from Eastern UP becomes an ambassador for the real Zari, whether they are, traveling on work. They were originally from there, now they live in Gurgaon and they're traveling somewhere on work. If they become ambassadors for a unique proposition from their home and their region, you will get the word out there better, more authentic, more powerful than any marketing campaign, paid marketing campaign can do. So how do you make that happen? Could be one of the sort of directions to think. How can travelers going from your home become ambassadors for what you are and what your products are? And that might be something to think about. The other is, in all of this travel, people want stories about the places they go to. How can we do storytelling of these places using products? You know, yesterday there was a very interesting example of sneakers, Jovita's sneaker project. And you know, as I was talking to Jovita, I realized she's from the Northeast. She's from Assam and she's from the Northeast. Northeast is going to open up as the next huge part of India that the rest of us are going to discover. And her sneakers could actually be the sort of lead the way to tell the story of the Northeast. And maybe that's the way we should be thinking about it. So there are many ways of you know, thinking about that. Storytelling through Indian places. Another interesting example, I don't know, you know, I went to Sarnath once, which is close to Varanasi. It's the place where the Buddha gave the first sermon. And when you come out of that area, the deer park, there isn't a single product to buy or anything about Buddhism there. So I was thinking about the Banarsi sari discussion that we had yesterday. Can the story of Buddhism be woven into the Banaras heritage that we showcase, and can that become an opportunity for us to, you know, to leverage all of this interesting stuff around travel that's happening? And I say all of this because all of these places are where Indians are going in large numbers, and I think for me, the essence of Indianness is where you can communicate a story effectively to other Indians. And I think that to me is a powerful idea. And the last one I want to leave you with is that, you know, we think about the India story as being limited to India. But for me, the most interesting thing was to find out that the India story is actually well beyond India. One example, there's a famous temple in China called the Shaolin Temple. Where is the Shaolin Temple? The Kung Fu thing. The Shaolin Temple has a certain stream of Buddhism called Chan Buddhism. Chan Buddhism comes from the word Dhyana, Chan Buddhism, right? Bodhidharma was an Indian monk who went there. And you know what is most important? Shaolin is considered the home of Chinese martial arts. And if you go to the Shaolin Temple website, the first thing it will tell you is that the martial arts came from Kerala on their official website. So we've got tremendous opportunities to explore in other countries and to leverage how India and Indianness has gone to those countries and maybe present our case across the world. So there are, I think, travel and travelers, tremendous opportunities for Indianness to be presented to them through all of the creative work that I think a lot of you are doing. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Hari. That was very, very interesting. Thanks. My two takeaways.
My two takeaways, which are very interesting. First, you talk about the travelers. 50 million, did you say? Going abroad. So, in terms of how Indianness can spread, or this scent can spread, 50 million Indians going abroad. Add to that, I don't know the number of Indian diaspora.
That's the same.
About the same? That's 100 million.
50 million every year going abroad.
Yeah, so I mean that's a significant number of Indians everywhere. And the last point that you mentioned about, let's call it the cultural appropriation, Bandana and I, we were talking about this yesterday. So the point you're making actually is, cultural appropriation happened. It has happened to yoga, it is happening also to Ayurveda, it has happened to many other things. Why can't we take that and turn that into our advantage and say, okay, Indianness already exists in all these places. There are so many different possibilities. We have got 100 million and more ambassadors. Is there a way to plug it all together? Any views on?
Check. All right, guys. So there's one piece I think, Hari, I'm going to take from your story about how people pack before a trip, right? And you spend a lot of money on that. Clearly, I'll tell you a short story about, how once we were doing a small camping trip somewhere, and there were two families traveling, and before the camping trip, both the boys were so excited about barbecuing and things like that. We went and, bought out half of nature's baskets, meat baskets, saying, all right, we're going to go and, barbecue. And we packed the back of the car with so much of meats, etc., vegetables, right? The vegetarians ate a little bit, the boys still had so much food remaining, and then we came back and half the car was still as is. All the meat was intact, right? Now, taking that same thought ahead, Indians love to tell stories of their travels, and I think storytelling is a very big aspect. If all of us can, when we all 150 people over here and those 50 million people who are traveling across the globe, if we tell stories of India, that's spreading Indianness. That's spreading stories about the culture, about aspects from our city, from our small towns, etc. Stories of travel really travel. So I think that's one important thing that, I think we should inculcate on all of us, to kind of tell stories to foreigners, because foreigners don't know what to expect when they think of India, or even global Indians for that matter, right? People in the north don't know what they're going to get from the south when they're traveling there. So I think stories helps, shape the whole thing, shape the whole space a lot better. And I think therefore maybe storytelling is a very important aspect of travel.
So I very simple thing out.
Okay.
Perhaps my
Just take that. Yeah.
So at the Voice of Fashion, we are trying to create content alongside a major e-commerce giant by involving, we want to involve tier 2, tier 3 Indians, and storytelling is how we have looked at it. So we have invited people to say how I wore what I bought. Now you see that if you look at the demographics, somebody in West Bengal versus somebody in Gujarat or the south of India buys the same pair of palazzos from Myntra or Jabong, and then these women or customers, and they could be whatever they buy of either gender, are encouraged to show a photograph of how they wore it. There is not, of course there will be difference because every person is different, but there is an almost regional personal signature that's sneaking out of these stories. So when the first few stories started bubbling up and we saw that you could try and identify somebody from Murshidabad versus somebody from Gandhinagar, despite the same palazzo being worn, there was a sense we were getting, and we decided that we would allow 50, 70 or 100 stories to come up so that maybe we can present the whole content differently. So when Richard said this, this story, there is an Indianness there definitely, clearly, and these palazzos are available to anywhere in the world. So I'm not saying that these are stylistic inspirations. It's not like in the land of Beyonce somebody is going to wear a palazzo like a Murshidabad girl, but who knows? And so this wafting of signature does happen through this kind of storytelling.
Bandana, if I may call upon you. We are running a little bit late. So not yet. Okay. Okay.
Can I suggest a talk? It's a little bit of a personal story.
Sure. Yeah.
It's fine. Okay. I'll tell you. I just want to give a little bit of clue to the. So we were talking about identity. We were talking about how in the magazine world, storytelling is so important. So this is what happened when we launched Vogue. Okay, so 13 years back is very interesting because the moment you say Vogue, it's an invasion of a very Western, like mammoth conglomerate that comes to, you know, a developing country. So there's awe and wonder. It was like, my gosh, you know, some goddess may as well have descended on earth, because it was like Vogue has arrived. And of course, the initial excitement is completely understandable. But for me, this is a personal journey. This is not me, you know, my takeaway from 13 years with Vogue has been excellent and beautiful. But my own journey of identity and a reminder of my identity also happened alongside. And I think this idea of Indianness fits in very well. So I started looking at it from the perspective that it was the Western world who was giving us the privilege of this luxury, of the magazine, of a sensibility that they knew better than us. You know, these were unsaid words, but that's, I suppose, the value of a big brand, that as big as the magazine. And this didn't happen in any insidious way, but there was always this thing that now we're going to be taught real style, okay? So from the very beginning, because I was very much part of the editorial team, and it was my job to look after everything that was written in fashion. I'm not a stylist, so I had nothing to do with all those beautiful pictures that you see. But anything that was written about fashion was certainly under my domain. So I very clearly established from very early on that I said, please, let's just sit back for a while. And at least for the first few issues, we need to do deliberate stories where we celebrate and let the world know what Indian style is all about. Because, you know, as soon as big magazines like this come, and, you know, Shefalee's also been the editor of Marie Claire, and so she knows that all these big international advertisers come in, and then the stories start getting tilted to a much more Western perspective, and then before you know it, we are being taught 5,000-year-old civilization, and we're going to be taught. So it was an interesting challenge because we have to maintain a nice balance. So every time, for instance, we did stories, which was, you know, in a very Western perspective, they're always about certain body types that is celebrated. So basically, the boobs and bums, like, you know, that's how the idea of sexuality is all about. So I remember calling an amazing jewelry historian, and I said, you've got to write an amazing piece for us, and we're going to do a beautiful shoot, but we want to talk about what's the erogenous zones of a female body from our part of the world. You know, it's Aman, it's the nape of your neck, it's a hair when you put all those beautiful flowers on the head, it's the ankle, it's the waist. I mean, it's so unique the way the body is celebrated in our part of the world. And we did a fabulous shoot with Lakshmi and with Prabhuda, who's an ace photographer. We did a beautiful shoot. And sure, it sort of exoticized India to an extent, but at that time it was necessary because what we were putting out had to be awe-inspiring to a very Western audience. So we weren't concerned about, I mean, of course concerned about our own readers in our own country, but to establish the tone. I remember, you know, anyone who's read anything about fashion, there's this whole hue and cry about the little black dress. You know, Chanel's little black dress, like that's supposed to be your ultimate touchstone of style. Like, God forbid a woman grows up without a little black dress. So I remember doing a story, I said, what little black dress? We have a little black sari. We wear that black sari to cocktail parties, we wear like cute, fun blouses with it. We'll wear our stilettos with it, but we have a little black sari. And we do. We always rely on that little. So it was very interesting because we did it in a fun way. But to me personally, it really was a reminder that I realized how proud, how possessive I was about my own culture, and how important it was for me when I was traveling to be the best representative that I could be for my country. So it ceased to matter whether it was a magazine that I was representing, because at that time also, you're talking about 10 years back, you didn't see anyone from India sitting in the front row of Paris Fashion Week or Milan Fashion Week. We were really breaking some rules there. So it was very important. So how do you position yourself? Do you go there looking super ethnic in a sari? Or do you go pretending that, you know, you could be Parisian too? So it was always, it's a big learning curve as to what my own identity was as being an Indian. And so I'm now we can put that to PDF. So this is a story that came about because, again, a lot of the stories I did personally was really for an international audience because I thought we've got to send out our imagery. We need to control before, they decide for themselves very erroneously that we're only Bollywood or that we're not sophisticated. So I went around villages in India. Don't start it till I tell you. So I went around many, many villages all over India, went and sat with the artisans. Vogue, we bought straight from the artisan. We bought the most beautiful fabrics, all handmade, all hand-dyed, extremely sustainable, extremely good quality. And that it was my job to cold call all the top brands and say, you got to make something out of it. And this is in no way trying to sort of make our Indian designers feel they couldn't do a better job, but I personally wanted to actually make sure that these designers, and I'm talking about the Louis Vuittons, the Diors, and the Gucci's, I wanted them to touch and feel the fabric. Send them the stories about where they came from, who made it, So I remember, and it's a very difficult thing to do because none of these brands want to go left or right. They have their own DNA and they will not tamper with it whatsoever, leave alone take a Maheshwari and then, use it in one of their iconic designs. But I got lucky because I had to go to Taipei to interview the designer for Burberry, a designer label called Burberry. His name is Christopher Bailey. He just left. And Taipei is like a tech city. It's the whole experience of going to meet him there was about technology and immersion and 360-degree immersion, and the show was a holographic show and models were in the air. I mean, it was just crazy. And after I interviewed him, I just took him aside. I said, I want you to see some pictures because just 2 days back, I was in a village in Maheshwari and see what the kids are doing. They were weaving and there's the river and then there's the cricket happening and the temple bells are ringing. And I said, look at the fabric that comes from there. I said, do you think I can send you something and you'll make something? And maybe we'll move to the next. And Burberry made the classic trench with Maheshwari silk. Okay? I didn't do anything. I was just like the middleman, the conduit. There's the designer and there's the artisan. And look, I mean, so they were fascinated. Can I tell you, and after this I'll stop talking so we can just scroll. On top is the name of the designer, below is of course the fabric. And usually when I show this overseas, I tell them about Maheshwar because we're all from India. I don't need to tell you how a bandhani is made and all that, right? So once Burberry said yes, then going to Gucci. So guess what? Burberry's doing it. You can do it too. Gucci did it, and you can do it too. Because everyone looks left and right. Oh, so they're doing it, then we'll do it. So I got 32 of them, 32 international designers to collaborate. And this is the story, the part I love telling my Indian friends who are designers. Like, we undervalue the fabric that we create in this country. Because if you saw the reaction of these designers when they got the fabric, they did not want to cut it. I'd get panic calls saying, Gucci got a patola, you'll see it. And creative freedom was theirs. Now, you want to cut the patola and make it into a skirt? There's nothing I can do about it. I had deep dived into this project already. But I remember getting a call and saying, I just cannot cut it. And even things like this, when they cut it, the leftover fabric, they pack it like it was like gold and send it back to me because it wasn't going to go into the dustbin. And they thought it was too precious for them to keep it, like it was like, indecent to keep it. So I'd get it back. So it's a learning curve, and a lot of the Indian designers saw this. We can also do it. So I said, then do it. Why aren't you doing it? Why are you not making modern clothes for Indian women who also love to wear the sari, don't get me wrong. But I always say, pull out the sari that you keep piling up into your cupboards, especially the young ones, thinking one day I'll wear it, which you never do. Turn it into a beautiful jacket and wear it. And so this is an example of what we can do with our own textiles. And most importantly, that we can have an idea of Indianness that is modern. And modernity, as she said, is a mix of ideas. We are all globe trotters. So we are all sponges. So the idea of just being homogenized is not what I'm trying to say, but I think there's so much that we can take from whatever we see and feed ourselves. And I think that is modernity. When you can bring a beautiful mix which has dignity, which has respect, and it's cool and it's timeless, right? Okay, so let's now scroll. Now, look at that. Yeah, then look at this. This is the Orissa Ikat. And Peter Palotto had done a collection of just prints that looked exactly like this. So when he got the Ikat, he said, "Jai, show you my collection beforehand?" I said, "No, I mean, I know these designers, as in I've written about them." So I said, "It would work beautifully for you," and he was over the moon. Now, Alberto Ferretti did not want to cut the sari at all. And I could only send them the sari because that's our weaving length and breadth, right? So she wrapped it into an evening gown. Todd's turned a kanjivaram. This was the latest bag that we created, and we just used it with. So the one who's doing this, how you can use fabrics. Those are the experts. See, this is the patola. So Gucci, they didn't cut it. They just put one tiny seam at the back and made it into a dress. This is the Jamavara. I can't read from here. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. This is so beautiful. I mean, this is Baluchari. How beautiful is that fabric? I mean, the sand silk. I mean, look at the bandhani. It's just so glamorous. Sorry. And that's the humble katha work on one of the most expensive brands, Hermes. The juxtapositioning was quite something. That the Lucknow chicken curry, with such elegant, beautiful fabrics. I think that's the last one. Yes?
Well, thank you. Just re-emphasizing, and I repeat again, don't be afraid of being influenced by the world, but please do not be shy of influencing the world. I think that's where we are. Yeah? Which actually brings us to Shefalee. I've kept her for the last because I think she will be touching upon something which is, and I have spoken about this very often, about the human and the Indianness residing in our humanity. For the longest time, even now, and I repeat once again, we've treated our artisans as a pair of hands. And as long as we do that, we are not doing anybody a favor. Because surely that human is capable of more than just working with the hands. We've got to bring them up the value chain. They can do much more with their mind. They can do much more with their heart. And it's only when the three things come together and we create more value will we see the needle at the grassroots level moving. Until then, there is no chance. As long as they stay as a pair of hands, there is no chance the needle for them is going to move. And that's where our big power lies, as much as in the youth, as much as in the millions of our artisans that reside all over the country. And that's the power that only resides in India. These beautiful fabrics that Bandana showed are not being woven in Arvind Mills in Ahmedabad. Shefalee.
Thank you. No. So, when the first email from Shilpa Sharma came to me introducing Anchal and this program, asking me if I would participate here, I had just finished attending a T.M. Krishna concert in Chennai a day before New Year's Eve. Having generally marinated my cultural thoughts in Delhi, I wafted into the T.M. Krishna concert not wearing a sari, which I usually wear, and there I saw Sanskritized dressing while attending a conference. A majority of the audience was dressed in kanjurams with flowers in their hair, chappals, very little or no makeup, including even the few foreigners I saw either had a dupatta or the half sari and so forth. And I came out thinking that, this is an idea of Indianness that I must write about. Why a Delhiite does not wear a sari or a salwar kameez or a chudidar to a Sufi concert, but you'll see Delhiites wearing jeans or skirts or anything to anywhere. Yet there was this difference in Tamil Nadu, in Chennai, that I noticed, and I picked up a strand and it stayed close to my heart. And then Shilpa sent me a WhatsApp message saying, will you look at our email? And there's something that we do here as a creative and cultural business program. My thought started from there. Later, when Anchal said that this is going to be, an exploration of Indianness, I had many thoughts bubbling over, as most writers or anybody interested in the cultural and crafts industries do, as this panel has deliberated. So what I have done is, do I have five to 6 minutes?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so these are some images that you can see. And the point, I want to bring you a few stories. What I'm arguing for is a restoration of the grammar of power, of knowledge. Why must it seep from the urban design student or the urban thinker or the urban mentor to the weaver to save a craft? Can we say, yes, of course, design minds, design thinking, design education, design mentoring is crucial and critical to learning the aesthetic, tweaking the aesthetic, making it global, making it relevant, making it softer, more saleable. But that doesn't mean that the flow of knowledge only goes from here to there. So as a journalist, every time I have traveled, and I have traveled to most weaving clusters across India, I have found that the weaver or the weaver's son or the craftsperson's son or daughter is waiting to be rescued by a designer, or waiting to be rescued by somebody who comes from the city and tells them, काम ऐसे होता है, काम वैसे होता है, colors ये होते हैं, ये pastel colors हैं, ये अंग्रेजी color हैं, and so forth. By doing that, we help them. However, there is a grammar of knowledge and understanding that these people have in any case. And they don't just know how to weave. They don't know how just to weave khadi, which the technologies of khadi would humble the most complicated design mind in the world if you understand the coarse khadi of Andhra and the soft khadi of Murshidabad or Pulia in Bengal. That apart, that is technical weaving skill. But then there are human behavioral aspects. There is the idea of teamwork, there is idea of community, there is the stability of marriage. There are so many complicated and very interesting ideas that are sitting inside the crafts and cultural ecosystem of India, which don't seem to waft from there to here. So I submitted to Anchal that I want to speak about that. When we were setting up the Voice of Fashion, a digital newspaper that appears daily on fashion and design, we thought we will move from one craft, one region to another to uncover dress and identity issues. बाकी तो सबको पता है बनारसी क्या है, कांजीवरम क्या है, नागा बीड्स क्या है, but how do we step a layer down? So my way of revealing this, and this is actually what has got a lot of global response, is I went to Northeast and looked for Assamese writers who wrote also in English and posited to them very simplistic questions. I'm not an expert in all these regional intricacies of craft and design, but to Parismita Singh, who writes beautifully in Assamese as well as in English and actually illustrates, I said, every time we hear a Northeast story, there is a woman sitting somewhere. There is a woman orchestrating the music. There is a woman lamenting a death. There is insurgency in the Northeast. There is loss. There is intimacy. There is creativity. So what's going on? Can you write an opening column to a Northeast section that decodes the cultural narrative importance of the woman at the helm of this? Parismita was so taken by this, she said, I've never written on fashion, and I said, this is not about fashion. This is cultural identity, this is narrative writing, this is interpretative writing. She came on to write a series that I am so proud of, I get ghost flesh when I read it. She called it The Broken Thread. She also does illustrations for all the columns that she writes. And in the first story, she spoke about the story of Harlimbai, who died. She was a weaver, and her loom was dismantled. And when Harlimbai was carried for the funeral, for the cremation, the loom and the sari, the sari wove, it's actually a folk tale that she interpreted, an Assamese folk tale. And the fluttering sari and the dismantled loom, jiski lakdi phail gayi har jagah pe, that she said gave a craft impetus across the region. She said, she asked the reader to think, why do we still weave in 2019 when everything has changed? India is still weaving. There is something that is connecting the dots. Do you know how your aunt's sari was woven? Forget mother and grandmother, those are the normal things. Do you know why your domestic help wears what she wears? Where do you stand when you connect the dot? Who are you? Try to find that. And through that narrative, slowly she talked about school uniforms of the Northeast, what the men wear, why Hima Das, who won the race of her life, she held the victory gamusa, the gamcha, at her race. That is what, when she won the race, and that became the flag of victory. It came from a weaver's loom, a female weaver's loom. So as this story decoded for the Voice of Fashion, then after 3 months of that, we reached the south of India, and similarly, I met Annapurna Mamidipudi, who has a PhD in weaving technologies, in modern weaving technologies, and I again started this rant. And I said, what is that one idea that will distinguish to the global reader what South India weaving means, and to the Indian reader, we don't know what's going on. And she said, just as you're talking about the woman in the Northeast, in Andhra, in Tamil Nadu, and in the southern regions, it's the marriage that holds the stability to the livelihood, to the quality of the fine weaving, because the husband and the wife weave together. When the marriage disintegrates, when there are stresses in the marriage, the quality of weaving disintegrates, the deliveries are delayed, and everything changes. The complexion of livelihood changes, employment changes. That's Indianness. That is what perhaps, this is not a moral lecture or a moral standpoint that I'm taking. I'm just making some observations on Indianness, on what is coming from the craftspeople. And I think I see Mr. Ashok Chatterjee here at the Chirala workshop, which talked about the industrialization of Indian crafts and addressed technologies in hand weaving in November in Andhra Pradesh, brought in a whole lot of weavers to talk to design thinkers on how these knowledge positions could be reversed. So we are not just learning how to strap the loom, where to sit in the pit loom, which colors to use, but we are learning a whole lot of things about weaving marriages. And this story starts with this wonderful line, my marriage is made of gold, because they use the gold thread on the Kanjivaram sari. Now I'll be very quick, I know we are running short of time. So, in my email, which was a little longish to Anchal, I talked about what else can we learn from this grassroots. Kani weaving is just one way, but there is the lesson of resilience of crafts in completely militancy hit Kashmir. आज भी कानी shawls बनती हैं, पश्मीना बनता है, Kashmiri carpets बनते हैं. Can you imagine a region that has been ravaged? It is, full of bloodshed. It has natural calamities. Kashmir को क्या नहीं हुआ है? Still you get products from there. There must be something about those people that perhaps we need to bring to the urban centers, to design institutes, and take to TED Talks. I haven't heard a TED Talk about that. So these are Kani weavers at Imtiaz Aslam's workshop in Ganderbal district, where I had gone to report. This is the first place where women weavers were encouraged to step out of their home and not weave at home and come to a center. Khadi, aap sabko pata hai. Now, grammatical meditation instead of meditative grammar. I have switched the words to offer a new idea that this is grammatical meditation, because meditation के ज्ञान के रास्ते अनेक होते हैं. Khadi pe I won't dwell for very long. You know about this as well. The Jai Museum at T2 terminal by Rajiv Sethi has so many artisans, craftspeople, painters, modern artists, fine artists, all working together to offer the idea of India that is so strong, that is so clear. It doesn't just have to be strong, it's clear. And so there is this, what has been, and in fact this installation is called Guardian Angels of India, and it could not be more metaphorical. This is what that entire unity has created. This Madhubani artist contributed to that museum. This is a weaver from Gangtok. Hand block printing is about precision and persistence. I was recently researching a story on health problems of the craftspeople and weavers and people who work in these industries, and I was told that jo thappa lagta hai, the hand block printer gets a particular kind of callus on the hand and a particular backache. And then they learn how to work within that and still give you great quality printing and great digital. So this is not, digital that we have to learn from them, but we have to learn something we could perhaps. This polo attire of Manipur sits in the Lexington Museum in the USA. Now, how is this not an idea of India? This is such an unusual image, and there is a burst of such images under this story. These are extractions of silk. This is a weaver from Tripura. The telegram from Tripura was an IMG Reliance initiative, United Nations, British Council together. So eventually this is what I'm arguing for the rebalancing of the knowledge scale. What could we do that brings into our fold, into these forums, on these panels, people who argue in whichever, हम interpreters सबको देते हैं, सिर्फ we can't just give it to political leaders who come from there. We can give an interpreter to a weaver from Tamil Nadu, somebody speaking in Assamese, and tell us how do they do their things, what is a day like for them. Constantly I feel in my reporting that we are worried about our young generation. हमारे millennials क्या कर रहे हैं? उनके भी millennials हैं भाई, वहाँ भी young generation है. And the grammar of dignity will not just perhaps come from increasing their wages, which of course must be increased, and commerce, everything has to be settled, but it is about a two-way learning process, which is how an ecosystem gets more oxygen. And that's how I think, Sanskrit में एक saying है, and I'll end with that, काका काका पीका पीका, कौवा कौवा होता है, कोयल कोयल होती है. So let us not just assume कि कौवे एक तरफ रहते हैं और नाइटिंगेल दूसरी तरफ. Let us look for a little more. Thank you very much.
Collaboration, the humanness, the human stories that Indianness resides in. Shefalee, thank you very much. It's a very, very fitting closure and provocation to what we stand for. And we don't just talk. Shefalee, you are absolutely right. And we at the beginning of this particular cohort, um, we started on a very bold experiment. This two-way learning that you talked about. I think the weavers that we've had from Maheshwari, from Banaras, from Kumaon, the natural dyers. In a cohort of 30, we had 7 grassroots participants, not just to learn, but to teach. I think this collaborative learning has been absolutely stunning, humbling for everyone. The other aspect to this experiment, which is not an experiment anymore because of success. आप सब लोग मानते हैं कि सक्सेस रहा है ये? हाँ? We did not try to dilute the delivery of the program. We did not try to, in any way, treat them or any other participants as 2 different worlds. We are one world. We are part of the same value chain. And I'm extremely happy that we were able to go through with this experiment, which we will now institutionalize for sure, and strengthen and take these learnings to the grassroots, which, as Shefalee was mentioning, it's not just about skilling. What do you mean about skilling a handloom weaver? They can come and teach us many things. Design education, as Shefalee was saying, I mean, teaching them about the different shades of colors and which one is the right one. I'm sorry, the problem that the artisans have had over the last decades is that they knew intimately, once upon a time, their customers. They were their neighbors. But today that chain is completely broken. And the distance has become at the 2 different ends, extreme ends of the value chain, where the only way to talk to each other is through multitude of middlemen. And there is no effort to bring them up the value chain in terms of management, in terms of processes, in terms of technology, in terms of getting to understand the customers. And I hope that this little effort from the Institute will go a long way and get institutionalized not only in this program, but can be taken to many other ways into many different programs, different institutions. We should not be afraid. I think all the design schools, all the management schools should learn from this and be able to bring in more diversity. Diversity not across just gender and communities and religions, but also in or backgrounds of educational background, but also in terms of the different ends of the value chain, and I think that is extremely important. I would like to open the floor to some questions. We can only take a few, so let the hands go up. Okay. Tanvi, do we have 2 microphones?
My question is to Shefalee and Bandana. I remember reading Shefalee's article, I think, a few years ago, about saying Indian designers should wipe out the Raja Maharaja aesthetics from their mood boards. It's too done.
थोड़ा echo हो रहा है तुम्हारा.
I remember reading one article long ago about you saying that Indian designers are overkilling the Raja Maharaja aesthetics, and it's too done to death, and the designers need to wipe out from their mood board, I mean, more or less. And I completely agree with that in more ways than one. And I agree to Bandana's thing that Bollywood is not the dictation of what Indian fashion stands for. But if these two major, I would say, easy selling, I mean, uh, let's say benchmarks for what a consumer buys in India for celebration wear, where do designers in the new generation look for muses, and how do the new age customers upgrade themselves to find a new aesthetic to aspire for, and not ape what Deepika wore to her wedding or what Raja Maharajas wore like 100 years ago, which are good for the museums at some point. But
So the piece that I think you're referring to is Princesses, Palaces and Pearls, which is 2 or 3 years back. I think designers have moved from there. And I usually never urge a boycott. That's not my business. My business is to observe. I feel that designers, the design industry should be the first or amongst the first to shake off associations with the colonial past, because we are looking at liberation as a broader idea. If we are looking at a colonial past and the complex relationship between royalty and the colonized India, or what happened privy purses and so forth, it's very important to let go of that visual imagery to explore something new that's exciting, that is sensual, that is glamorous, and that does not have to be with a bejeweled turban or with the extensive jewelry a Maharani wears. Should designers My other observation was that most of senior designers cling to that kind of imagery, and the younger designers have actually moved. If you look at the visuals that come out of fashion weeks or come out of fashion campaigns right now, the younger designers are using the street, the beach, so many other influences, including international backgrounds or declutter, as we call it in fashion, decluttered backgrounds, to tell their story, because they suddenly realize that the garment is more important than the narrative. And the narrative, one has to follow the other. And so I think the industry has already moved. About Bollywood, it's really complex. Yes, constantly there is this lament from designers that we interview from time to time. Bandana will agree. Yesterday we published a story by Shahab Durazi, who claims, may have never read a story, an interview with Shahab Durazi. He claims that Bollywood is the single largest diluting disservice to Indian fashion, because we don't even see Indian fashion. We are seeing hodgepodge versions put on by stylists of these design stars on on the celebrities, and that filters down. And where is Indian fashion? What can designers do? You asked me that question. I think designers should say no to giving free clothes to stars. Not, there should be a clear commercial contract. Will Aishwarya Rai do a free campaign for Shahab Durazi or for Tarun Telyani? Or no, she'll never do it. But why do they want free clothes? So I think terms of negotiation have to be clear. Stylist mafia has to be understood for its talent and not for its sourcing. So designers will have to take certain stands to say how they are incestuously linked with Bollywood. They'll have to step back. There are certain designers, as Durazi points out, and we all know, who completely promote their work on the basis of Bollywood designers, और उनके पास कोई कहानी ही नहीं है बताने के लिए. So when designers say no to the Bollywood showstopper, can a fashion week be done without a Bollywood showstopper? Why not? Let's try one. So the leaders of this industry, those will be the change makers who will say, let us explore something else. नहीं बिका तो चले जाइएगा वापस बॉलीवुड के पास, शुरू तो कीजिए.
Hi. So I was actually going to say something else, but when you pointed out about the fashion show, and so last year after the program, I actually did my first fashion show, and I'd like to start with that. And we had a chance, because Surat is a small city, we had a chance to get Esha Deol to be the showstopper. And my concept was for my clients to walk the ramp. So I took a stance and I said, I don't want any Bollywood, this thing, because that will dilute. I mean, my clients who have really, really given their time and effort, they were doctors and all. So I took a stand, and I just remembered right now that I didn't want it. But my question was that it actually weaves a couple of observations that I made during the talk. One was about the hip hop and the music. So some of us, we said, why not the Indian music? And so I could see your point of view also, that the mainstream wants something and you have to give them that for the commercial reasons. So for a designer, it is always a big dilemma to walk that thin line where does she say, no, this is what I'm going to do, in terms of the opposition from higher authorities or anybody, any other people who are the decision makers, to actually take a stand and say, no, maybe this is what the mainstream is doing. We could also talk about Bollywood in that thing, that, this is what mainstream is doing, no, but this is what I want to try. So where does the designer or someone who is in the middle and not maybe the end decision maker, how can he or she influence this thought process and kind of bring about the change and be bold enough, and how is it that we can break that barrier where we can influence the decision maker? Why this question? Because I'm coming from a jewelry industry, which is very, very traditionally, it functions in its own way. I'm talking about fine jewelry. The jewelers have a set mind. This is how we will do our work. When a designer, they will try and encourage a fashion designer to become a jewelry designer. Yeah, but they would not promote a jewelry designer for her design. So how do you actually go about, trying to break the mainstream mindset?
Yeah. I mean, if I can, it was a long question.
Check.
But
I'm
I
sorry
think I'm
about that.
struggling
I
to
actually,
understand. Hold on.
yeah.
Is your question basically that how does a different voice find its audience within the mainstream noise?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
in simple terms, that's the question.
Right.
Yeah, please.
Okay, guys, I'm going to keep this very short as an answer back.
I'm sorry about
But,
that.
okay, but essentially, see, you need to understand how the Bollywood business functions, right? It's a director who's taking a call. He aligned with it, probably an actor who's saying, oh, look how I look, and this is how I want to present myself, and the director's saying, fantastic. Now, it's very important that designers need to present an Indian style that is authentic to the director, show him that this is something that's going to work. The director's looking for innovation, essentially, something that's unique that can be brought to the table. So it's the director who's, yes, taking a call and saying, you know what, I want something cool, I want something that looks different. It's for the designer to make sure that she can convince the director that, I can change this and I can bring something that's authentically Indian into the space.
Anybody else?
Requires money, because all this is done for sponsors. So the designers, there have to be other investment modes besides Nokia and Nexa and all Lakme and whoever wanting their showstoppers, because they'll get media. That circuit has to be busted. So fashion investors have to come up and say, no creative interference. Go, I will give you 50 lakhs. Do it with or without Kareena Kapoor.
Yeah.
Just a quick observation again from outside. Isn't it, to me, it looks like there's a very strong business case to do it. And it's about scale of ambition. If you go back and say that, the large companies go back and say that, you know what, my job is not just to give what the Indian market wants today, which of course we will do, but we will create a global market rising out of here, which is going to be 10x, 20x, 500x of what it is, then I think the business case is automatic, the way I think about it. And therefore, maybe not being ambitious is the problem here. At one level, and it's not really about somebody in the middle of the chain. I get your question specifically saying, as somebody in the middle of the chain, how much can I influence? And probably that's a good point. I don't think you probably can influence much, but the big money can certainly influence.
Juhi, yeah.
I have a couple of questions, but the first question is to Hari or any one of you. I come from the other side of the Millennium group that I work with in the rural space. They all seem to also have similar aspirations to travel and to do fashion and music. How do you think we as business entrepreneurs or who are trying to do creative cultural practices get to them? How do you make travel, which has now become easy and fashionable amongst the urban millennials, how do you think we could get them to also travel? Because they do want to. I deal with them on a regular basis and they've got the similar aspirations. So what should we do? What kind of business, if we have to create, what should we do to even reach out to them? They are equally important to our country.
Please.
I'm going to go at it slightly elliptically, right? So I'm just going to give you one or two other examples of possibilities. So, all of the discussion we are having here on fashion, it's an epiphany moment for me because I could have had the exact same discussion on travel. In a room full of people who are looking at travel, right? Similar kind of, correct. And I think that's an interesting one. So I think there are two parts to it. One is, what is the friction in being able to travel, right? One is lack of familiarity, the other is economics. And there actually, in my opinion, is in the third. So lack of familiarity, is how likely am I to be comfortable in some alien environment? And therefore, people who are a little this thing, just step back from that. It's a language issue, it's a food issue, it's a sense of the unknown, right? Issue, which is actually not a small issue. You'd be surprised at at where that is. So one thing is to see whether there can be something that makes these groups feel less intimidated from going outside their comfort zone, and maybe ambassadors from within their group that help them go could actually be the answer to that. So for example, in Kutch, when I met you, I also went to a bunch of homes in that area, and I actually spent the day with various families, and they're all itinerant sellers. They go all over India. They told me that they come to Bangalore 8 times a year, and they go to, in fact, my mother lives in a small place in Kerala, and they said, we go there as well, and it was incredible. What I'm saying is, some of those people can then give possibly the comfort of the unknown to the rest who are unable to, or who find it difficult to cross that threshold. That's one. The second point, I think, is the economics of travel. In India is extremely expensive to travel. Accommodations, of a certain quality, etc., etc. So I'll give one idea around that, but these are really things that all of us will have to work on. But I was in the Sikkim Manipal University, which is a lovely campus just before Gangtok, an hour before Gangtok. And, it's a beautiful campus with a lot of rooms, very similar to this. And the most difficult problem in Sikkim is to get a room in peak season. There are some zillion rooms inside Sikkim Manipal University which are empty during summer because the kids go home. And, so we don't think of solutions. And I was asking the dean, and the dean was there, the tourism minister was there, and it's a small place, so everybody kind of gets together. And I was asking them, why don't you do this? And of course, they were saying, wow, it's a great idea. I'm sure nothing's happened after that. But and that's one of the challenges. And the question I asked myself was, why is it that I did nothing about being able to take it forward? And honestly, I don't have a good enough answer for that. But I think it's those directions. If we can solve, crack the problem in these two parts, making the unknown a bit more familiar, and then figuring out the economics. So, maybe all of the academic campuses across India should just get together and we just do it for these people. We just do it for this people.
Yeah, great idea. Yes, thank you.
Well, I'm going to ask everyone else to hold on to their questions. Take them home and think about them. Okay. So, and send us the answers. So, I really hope this conversation was exciting for all of you. For us, it surely was. I can speak for myself. I've learned. And we could go on, but the clock tells me that we are already 37 minutes beyond schedule. And she's ringing the bell only now. What were you doing all this while? Okay, I'm going to hand over the proceedings to Gitanjali. Where is Gitanjali? And yes, just give us a minute and start.
Um, well, I wish each one of us could express how we are feeling at this very moment. But if I could speak on behalf of the audience, I think we all have a responsibility and an exciting adventure to embark on with ourselves, with our Indianness, and with our identity. Thank you so much. May I please invite the panelists to take your seats?
You hear us. Okay, so.
I now invite Professor Karna, also co-chair of the program, to say a few words and hand out a token of thanks.
Thank you, Gitanjali. Okay. So first of all, to all the panelists, Shefalee, Bandana, Hari, and Richard, thank you very much for making it to I Am Ahmedabad. So I guess Anchal already hinted it earlier that that this was an experiment. Actually, the experiment started 6 years ago, which is the crafting lifestyle and luxury brand program. It started in a very different format. It has evolved over the time, and in fact, there are two major things that have happened apart from the new experiment that we started. So, give a master in management. Of course, finally the government will decide. But essentially, the core belief of our faculty, of our governors, of our founding fathers, in fact, had been that we actually look at the entire value chain and make sure that there is an equitable distribution of value all throughout the back end, the front end, simply because that's the only way it will make commercial sense on a sustainable basis. So, so just to kind of flag to the panelists that we stand committed, and we hope that we'll get your support in the future batches of the CCBP program as well. I would also like to thank Shami, along with the two panelists, Bandana and Hari, who spent several hours over the last few days deciding on the top six plus three project presentations. I know it was a long process for you going through all of these presentations and the criteria and everything. So thank you very much for all the hard work and also making sure that you don't lose the steam when you were here yesterday. Thanks a lot. I would also like to make a very special note and express our gratitude to the three mentors here, Karan, Manoj, and Prasad. I'm sure you must have seen some change in the ideas that have gone through over the past 6 months, and I think a large part of that in all of these ideas is owed to mentors like you, your involvement, and of course other mentors which we don't have here right now.
Yeah, altogether we have 16 mentors for this cohort, and each one of them is totally committed as the faculty as the students are. And I think this is a very, very significant backbone of the program.
Thank you very much.